Thank you for taking the time to watch this episode of Life Support. If you enjoy the content, we would ask that you like it, hit subscribe, and share it with your friends. Hey, welcome to Life Support. It's great to have you along. What we do on this program, it might be different than others you listen to. We talk about really difficult issues. We talk about trauma. We talk about suffering, because we believe that it's in those dark places of life that Jesus really shines through, and he is there, and we want to direct you to him. We want to give you resources to help you. And in order to do that in this program, we're super happy to have Greg Hasek here, who is a licensed mental health counselor, and we've got some fascinating stuff to talk about. So Greg, thanks so much for being here.
Great to be here, Steve.
It's great to have you. We were talking before that you, one of your specialties is dealing with men around the abortion issue. The abortion issue is a really, really difficult one, obviously. As a pastor, I many times don't know how to address this because I'm very well aware that there are people sitting out there that are in pain, that have been through an experience. And so many pastors were criticized for not holding a celebration party when Roe versus Wade was overturned. But I, for one, felt like, wow, there's going to be people out there that are going to re-experience their trauma if I do too much with this. But I want to talk about the men specifically because we tend to pass right over them. Can you tell me a little bit about how many men, what do they experience, and what kind of trauma did they experience when they're involved with an abortion experience?
Yeah, really good question. First, I want to say that men's trauma in general, whether in the church or out of the church, is oftentimes invalidated. Whatever trauma they go through, 1/3 of males by the age, or 1/5 of males by the age of 18 are sexually abused. There's a high rate of physical abuse in males as children. About 1/4 of females by the age of 45 had experienced abortion. There's a male with every female that has had an abortion, But the unfortunate part is that men are often perceived as perpetrators of females' trauma, again, even in the church, and not victims of trauma. And that's very critical to see the distinct difference there. Okay, perpetrators of female trauma, whether that's an abortion, whether that's an abuse, very rarely looked at as victims. And our culture kind of almost conditions our society to perceive men in that way, whether it's media, television, pornography. So when we talk about men in abortion, we talk about men who in general are not validated for any pain they're going through that's been traumatic, except possibly war veterans. Now, there's a reason for that, because war veterans, people that are in the war, are perceived as protectors of women, not people that provide trauma. They're protectors. The other men are perceived as perpetrators. Now, that being said, it makes it very difficult for a male that has experienced abortion to seek help, because there's nowhere in culture, and there's nowhere usually in church, that says your pain is real, you deserve to get help for your pain, and the loss of your child due to the abortion decision is real, and we want to help you. Men don't have any place to go. They really don't. Now, since the 1970s, since 1973, the crisis pregnancy but men were oftentimes left out of the equation. Now, that's changed quite a bit, and I've been doing this work since 2004, and that's been one of the great things that's changed. Okay? But rarely will you get a man seek help for it. Now, in my area especially, I specialize in those two areas of abortion and sex addiction. I'm able to work with the men that come into my office for the presenting problem of sex addiction. And about 1/3 of my males that have sex addiction have an abortion in their past. So what we know is happening is men, because of this trauma of abortion, are not dealing with it. They're medicating their pain through an addictive behavior. And unfortunately, because of that addictive behavior, they're perceived again as perpetrators of females' trauma. So it's a terrible cycle. And for the church to address the issue of abortion in general, even for females, it's very difficult, as you were saying. If we bring it up, is it going to cause more trauma? So again, we're talking one out of 4 women by the age of 45. So might as well say 1 out of 4 men. You look out at your congregation, every 4th person has had an abortion in their past. How are we helping those people? Now, what has to happen, and we learn this in the whole pornographic issue in the church, and the whole purity kind of issue in the church. In order for it to be a safe place, the culture of the church has to change around that issue. So it's not from a place of shame, but a place of grace. That means what's talked about from the pulpit has to change, and the culture has to change to where people that have had these experiences, men especially, can come forward and say, I'm not the only one, and I'm not going to be shamed, but I'm going to receive grace. And how we create a grace culture in the church for women and men about this issue.
It's very hard to do because the church seems so ill-equipped to do that. And, we all talk about being pro-life, but I don't know if we talk enough about being pro the people that have been through the experience in life. What are we going to do to help them? It's almost like a policy and then actual loving people through the love that Jesus has given us. Almost two different things, it seems like to me.
Yeah. And I guess one of the questions can be, what are the barriers? What are the barriers? And I'll tell you a quick story. I was standing out in front of a large church in Portland, Oregon when I lived out there. They were going to have a men's conference. 500 men were going to be at that conference, and I speak on men and abortion. And I said, let me come speak to your guys at the conference. You guys got 500 guys coming. The response, I'm sending out the parking lot of this church. He says, we don't have that issue as much out here in suburbia. The second thing he did, of course, I smiled and I said, yeah, right. The second thing he said was, you know what, Greg, we're building this brand new church, $1 million expansion. I said, listen, say no more. What you're basically telling me is you're concerned that if you address the issue, it could split the congregation and the offering might go down. I hate to say it, but these things happen. That churches are scared to address hard issues in case they offend people in the church, and it's going to affect many different things, not just the offering, but people might leave. And it's such a political issue. It's perceived as, okay, now you're talking about politics from the pulpit. No, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm actually talking about the pain of people in my congregation that are suffering because they lost children. Think about this. Men are wired to provide and protect. Their whole nature is to protect their partner or their spouse and protect their child and provide for their child. Okay, when an abortion happens, that's cut from a man, the very personhood. He wasn't able to protect his partner from the abortion. He wasn't able to protect his child from losing that child. That cuts so deep in a man's nature that he has nowhere to go to try to heal from that, because he's not hearing it from anywhere in the Christian community, because nobody's talking about it. And so every Sunday he goes and sits in the pew, right? He's struggling with alcoholism, he's struggling with anger, he's struggling with addiction and divorce. But nobody's talking about the abortion that's at the root of his issues, because he has nowhere to go. And so I think it's just another trauma, Steve, in the church, that's one that's not addressed.
Yeah. How what counsel would you give church leaders to try to develop a culture that can embrace this kind of trauma?
Yeah. Again, I was specialized in sex addiction at the same time. There was a pastor out there that started addressing sex addiction in the church. And he had struggled with sex addiction himself years ago and alcoholism. And he started preaching that from the sermon, from the pulpit. Here's what I struggled with. Here's what my issues were. I want to change the culture of this church. Within months, hundreds of men were coming forward to support groups for recovery from sex addiction. It took that one pastor that said, you know what, I struggle too. And you know what, I want to change the culture of this church where men can come forward in this church and say, you know what, I'm struggling with porn, I'm struggling with this, but it took the top down. It took that one person. And when we talk about abortion, it's the same thing. It takes that one person or that one pastor or that one leader to step out and say, how do we change the culture? Well, the first thing is we start to talk about it. We start to talk about it as it's not a shameful issue. Because I even go back to the Garden of Eden. If there's shame, you hide, right? Adam hid from God, right? He was like, where are you, Adam? Well, I mean, abortion that are hiding because they're so scared that if they even say a word about what they did, what's going to be happening? But if you change the culture and say, you know what, if you get pregnant, you are welcome here. If you have an abortion, you are welcome here. We are a church of grace and healing. Where do we start? And I think that's the starting point.
That's really good advice. You have to be vulnerable yourself. And I always struggle with how much is too much. I've told people my story before. They're tired of hearing it, but I'm going to guess that I probably don't talk about it enough. It just seems like I'm talking about it all the time because I have to live with myself.
Right.
But the more I talk about struggling in certain areas, the more people seem free to talk to me about it. And I think that's really good advice. The church you mentioned before, that, hey, we don't really want you to speak because we have this thing going on. I'm not even really sure that's a church. Jesus.
Welcome to Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, well, I understand. Welcome to probably everywhere, but I lived out in the Northwest too, so I'm with you. Jesus was the greatest grace giver ever. The disciples didn't even like the way he gave grace. The disciples were angry with him for giving grace. We got to hurry up. We can't talk to these people. What are you doing with that woman? And Jesus did it anyway. So maybe there's an element of courage here. Do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and it's interesting. In the last segment, I talked about the right brain, and I want you to think about this scripture from the Bible and see it. You might see it differently this time. Okay, Jesus came to heal the brokenhearted. Jesus came to heal those people that were traumatized in their right brain. So the heart that Jesus talks about in the Bible is the right brain where your trauma is stored. So Jesus came to heal those people traumatized in their right brain and set them free from their trauma. Now that sounds compassionate. That sounds grace-giving. That sounds healing. because this, like I said, the very thing that we don't want to do, we do. That the example of David in the Bible and adultery, these are all right brain issues. They were trying to serve God, but their right brain had trauma in it. David probably had PTSD. I mean,
Yeah.
and this is a perfect example to say, what can the church do differently? If Jesus came to heal the brokenhearted, Jesus came to heal the people that have trauma, how can we be Christ-like? Not just put on a great music event on Sunday. That's not Christ's journey of, helping people heal.
Yeah, it seems that there needs to be a full out effort by a unified leadership that we are going to change the culture of this church. The board has to have that in their hearts. The lead pastor, the other staff members have to be unified, because that's not a comfortable decision to make. And that's why churches don't do it, because that rocks people's world.
Yeah, if you don't talk about it, then people don't talk about it. If you don't talk about it, then there's no like open door. Like just you getting up and talking about your trauma in front of the church, man, that opens doors. That opens, when they come up to you and say, you know what, here's what happened in my life. Here's what happened with my son. Here's what happened with my wife. Like you open that door for people. But like, if we had more pastors that, because listen, I've had an abortion too, or you know what, I used to struggle with porn, and I want this to be a church where we don't judge. And you know what, how many pastors do you know, if they ever said, you know what, I've struggled with porn, are going to get shot down, and they might. We're gonna we have grace for you.
Yeah.
Well, no, you're supposed to be above reproach.
Right.
You're not supposed to have any trauma in your life.
It's really, yeah. I mean, you're speaking to my heart, and it's almost as if many churches have become a country club. So it'd be like walking into your local golf club and walking into the dining room and saying, "Oh, I have trauma." There's no grace there, because they're not set up to have grace, because that's not why the people are there. They're there to they're there to be consumers, and then they're going to lunch, and then the Vikings play, and then it's all gone till next week. So there has to be a fundamental change in how we even view church, and what ecclesiology is, and what is exactly church, and what is our responsibility in the body of Christ, it seems to me.
I totally agree with you. Like I said earlier, if you don't remember a sermon past Monday morning, what are we doing? Now, really, what are we doing? If the church body isn't learning how to help each other heal, and they just get out and they go to the Vikings game, then yeah, it's a consumer mentality. Hey, great sermon, pastor. Like, no, I'm not going to remember it Monday morning when I'm struggling with porn, or I'm arguing. Like, no, but I will remember if we do church different.
Yeah, that's right. And I tell you what compliment I don't like. Wonderful sermon. People will come up to me after church, and they will say, "Pastor, that was a wonderful sermon, Pastor." I don't want to hear that. What I want to hear is, "Pastor, you touched something in me today. I really want to pursue that. I want to pray about that." I don't want to give a wonderful sermon. I want to touch somebody's heart. And the church is, well, we can change. We can do this. There are people that want to change, and it starts with each of us. And so I'm not trying to be too hard on our churches, because the local church is beautiful. It's the bride of Christ. We love it, and that's why we want this. So just one more question. We got just a minute or two here, Greg. If a man's listening right now and he has been involved with an abortion, what does he do if he's kept it inside all this time?
Yeah, first I would say if a man's listening now has been involved with abortion, I want to validate your pain because our culture does not validate your pain. There's nowhere in culture that says you deserve to hurt. It's a woman's issue. You should even have pain. So first I want to validate your pain. Your pain's real. Second is I want to apologize that the church or anybody hasn't really like been there for you. It's sad that men have to suffer in silence like you. Third, it's a strength. Even though culture says it's weakness for guys, sometimes it's a strength. And I would say step out, contact someone that works in the field of abortion healing. I have a lot of network, and I'd be willing to help you, and just contact me through email. Um, And there are recovery groups that are out there for men and women that at crisis pregnancy centers locally, and oftentimes there's a few here and there in the church. Um, but really don't keep it inside, because if it's something that you have never dealt with, it's gonna manifest in other ways, whether it's addictions, anger, depression, anxiety, inability to attach to your children or your wife. It will manifest itself in a negative ways until you deal with that loss, because that loss was real for you. You lost a child that you could have had. You could have had a child that you did things with and brought up and played games with and shared life with, and that's a big loss for a male. And I would just say, your loss is real, and really kind of look at it as a strength to be able to try to seek some help for that.
That's good. Greg, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so again, I'm at Southwest Florida Christian Counseling in Florida. Our website is www, and then our telephone here is 239-301-4464. Again, my name is Greg Hasek.
Greg, you're doing some really important work. Keep up the good fight, and thank you for sharing some of it with us today. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much for having me.